I don't like Junko. If you know me, you know this isn't news. I have openly disliked Danganronpa's main antagonist for as long as I've been a fan of the series, and I have my fair share of subjective criticisms as to why. And I should say this right away because this video may be controversial. I know a lot of people do love Junko as a villain. Um, but this is my opinion. I'm not right, I'm not wrong. This is just what I personally think about Junko and what I feel about her, okay? Right, now let's get started. Oh, and one other thing, I'm really only going to be talking about her in regard to Trigger Happy Havoc because Danganronpa 2 doesn't really do much for her character, it doesn't really add anything, if I'm honest. And I haven't seen Danganronpa 3, although I hear it butchers every character, so I can only assume that makes her even worse. Regardless, Trigger Happy Havoc is where we see the most of her, so that is what I am going to be analysing and digging into and ripping apart as I explain why I think she is a bad antagonist, not only for the series, but just a bad villain in general. Let's dive in. Let me say this right now, a good villain does not need a strong motivation to be a good villain. Believing that one does is just a downright shallow way of viewing characterization. However, 9 times out of 10, a villain without a good motivation is much harder to write well than one with one, because you have less to work with. This means that without a motive, a villain must have something else going for them that makes them a good character, such as a compelling mindset, deep thematic relevance, or just simply being entertaining. That last part, though, is incredibly subjective, and I understand that. But in my mind, Junko is none of these things. If we're going to compare her to another motiveless antagonist, the first person that comes to mind for me in terms of being well written is Iago from Othello. A rather strange comparison to make to a shallow villain from a visual novel, I know. But hear me out and understand my reasoning. Iago is incredibly compelling. He is a smart, calculated, manipulative man who is driven solely by jealousy, an emotion that can truly drive someone to commit acts they may never have before. Othello is ultimately a tragedy, and Iago is the central force of that tragedy, successfully destroying all that's around him for very weak reasons. But what makes him strong is his deep thematic relevance expressed through his speech and overall narrative symbolization, which, when I personally analysed the text, made me really appreciate him as a villain. He's more than just a symbol of jealousy, he's a character with genuine, if you read between the lines, you can actually understand why he acts the way he does and understand why he's so well written. The same cannot be said for Junko. There is very little depth in what she says and does, and that is why I don't like her. She's not a character, she is a plot device who only acts based on what the game requires, not based on actual human emotions. So, Junko represents the feeling of despair, okay? Thematically, it makes total sense, right? The symbols of hope meet the goddess of despair. In fact, I'm pretty sure that is literally a line in the game. But that is all Junko is. She just represents despair, and that is all she is. She's a teenager who reflects the hopelessness many her age feel due to personal changes and emotional events people typically go through at that age. In some manner, she does reflect this, but it's never dug into. They don't really explain it. You can't really read between the lines and figure out, oh, okay, fair enough, I understand that. There's nothing to analyze. And she reflects this idea that I just described, but in a much more absurd and ridiculous way, to the point where you can't really pick anything out of it, because it's just a mess and a blur of random, lazy characterization. Junko is not an actual character. She is an ideology. She lacks one of the fundamental elements a character needs, and that's actually being one. She has, like, what, 5 different personalities that she switches between on a whim? I get why, because she gets bored quick or whatever the fucking stupid reason was. But this writing decision leads her to not really have any sort of character at all. There's nothing to dig into because she's 5 different people at once. It just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, sometimes, rarely though, actual Junko does show, but most of the time she's represented through one of her 5 different personalities, whether that be the fucking Queen of England, cutesy bitch, smart bitch, or loud bitch. She's always one of those. I probably missed one because I probably forgot it because it's incredibly forgettable and just stupid. The constant shift in personas leads her to just not have an actual character. There's almost zero actual Junko to dig into, and it's because most of the time she's just waffling using one of her many different forced personalities because of her stupid reasoning, oh, I'm just bored. The writers clearly intend to not give her actual character because her ideology is so separate from herself, because that's what she's intended to represent. But here's the thing, so many people when they analyze characters, they act as though writer's intention equals a good thing. Like, if you criticize something and then someone goes, well, that was what they intended. Okay, but what they intended was bad. It didn't work. She is literally just an idea, a concept of despair, that when you try analyzing her emotionally and psychologically, she truly makes no sense, even in the context of the game she's in. This is Danganronpa, okay? So I can tolerate a bit of absurdity and stretching of logic. Things need to make sense within the universe they are in. And with Junko, sometimes it does, but other times I'm just like, I'm just sick of this shit. Just give me some good writing for once, okay? Junko's writing is just blatantly lazy, and because the writers tried so hard to establish the theme and the idea she represents, they neglected to give her an actual proper character. Danganronpa 1's ending is insanely bland and boring because outside of the mastermind reveal, there's not much interesting going on. The ending is insanely lazy and can be summarized into, oh, the world's in despair and this girl did it, and that's it. Danganronpa 1 has brilliant writing in some areas, namely the trials and investigations, but outside of that, it doesn't really have very much. You know, this forms up this big web of mysteries that the cast have to uncover, and so many of these reveals and moments are incredibly captivating and interesting. And so, as a fan of this elaborate mystery the game gives off, for the game to just completely throw it out the window at the last minute in favor of the laziest, stupidest, most unbelievable world building and ending of all time, it really pissed me off. Now, if you don't know what world building is, it essentially refers to the world in which a story takes place in, and is generally put on like a scale of, how good is it. So, like, the world that the game or story is in, and how well it creates rules and law and logic that explains that world and justifies it and explains why it's going on. Some games and stories have incredibly deep world building where you can dig into so much lore surrounding it, but then you've got games like Danganronpa where the world building is terrible and it leaves you with way more questions than answers, and you basically know nothing about what's actually going on. It's just a blur of, well, none of that made any sense. Think about a similar game here, 999 of the Zero Escape series. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. The Zero Escape series in general is just better written than Danganronpa. I don't think there's any denying that. It is objectively better in the writing department. And the ending is incredibly compelling and well executed that it truly single-handedly led me to lament my own taste in games and made me think I should heighten my standards because this is just that good. Everything about it works on an emotional and thematic level, and when you look back, you see so many brilliantly placed plot points and ideas that all add up to the game's writing peak, leaving you with a mind-bending shock beyond belief. Compare that to Danganronpa, where the game throws these elaborate mysteries your way, does a great job expanding upon them, only to lazily throw it all away in the final trial because everything can be boiled down to this one shallow, poorly written girl's despair ideology. And it doesn't help that within Trigger Happy Havoc they made no effort to explain what's going on outside, how Junko did it, or anything in between. Sure, this leaves more room to explain it later, but I feel like at least some of these questions should have been cleared up, because it just comes off as lazy writing, where you have a lazy excuse of an ending that just throws away all the intriguing mysteries we were presented with before, and instead just lets it go without any actual depth or character sit there until your shit's fucked. That's what the Danganronpa 1 ending feels like. It is a lazy lore dump of just empty, soulless, poor world building garbage that people will try and sit here and tell you is filled with depth and reason, when I'm going to sit here and tell you it's not. And I know it's just my opinion, but I am so passionate about how much I think she is a shit antagonist that I will sit here and make fun of her all day long. She is terrible. I know they expand upon Junko in other entries such as side novels and the Danganronpa 3 anime, but in strictly Danganronpa 1, Junko fails to serve the role as a compelling antagonist, as she just straight up isn't a character. She's a shallow presentation of a theme and ideology which does not make for an interesting ending at all. Nothing about her interests me. It is literally just blatantly bad writing, and the entire ending is just a lazy fucking. The writers going, oh, you know what, guys, I've had enough. Right, we're not getting paid enough, so we're just gonna say, you know what, this one girl did all this, because that's the thing. Junko, like I said before, she isn't a character. She doesn't act based on actual human emotions or, reasons or things that have happened to her. She doesn't act based on that. She acts based on what the plot needs her to do next. Nothing that she does makes sense in context to who she is and the world around her. Everything she does just needs to make sense in order for the story to make sense, without any actual, exploration of herself or why she might be doing this. It's just, oh, I do this because it's convenient for the story, and it's the easiest way to explain why everything is so fucked and why this killing game is happening. It's lazy, bad writing, and it makes her not a character. That's another issue that I have with Junko, is the fact that she doesn't make sense as a person. There's nothing about her that you can look at and say, okay, it makes sense why someone acts like this. She literally just acts like she does because it's convenient for the plot for her to have done so. She doesn't act like a person. Nothing about her is a person. She's a convenient, lazily written antagonist with no depth, no anything about her except, oh, despair, despair, because that's what the game required. The game set up all these elaborate mysteries and they couldn't find a better way to explain them, so they just decided to get some random high school girl and justify her entire actions by saying, oh, she's really smart, yeah, she wants to destroy the world. That's bad and lazy writing, and you can't convince me otherwise. Danganronpa 2's ending is a little better, but it doesn't really expand upon Junko at all, as I said at the start. At least not in a way that I feel like is relevant to analyse, because this is Junko Enoshima. There's no depth to begin with, there's nothing to really dig into at all. This is why I personally love V3 so much, because it's got nothing to do with what I dislike so much about the original story, and instead presents a brilliant and captivating piece of metafiction. But that's a story for another time, okay? I'll dig into Danganronpa V3 more. I already have done a video on V3 and why I love it so much. But because the video wasn't scripted, I just kind of went for it. It's all over the place. I repeat myself a lot, so I don't really... I'd recommend we go take a look. But there are some issues with that video, and I think I'm going to make a whole analysis on V3 in general later down the line, after I've dug into, this and a few other things about the original Hope's Peak arc. Speaking of V3, I think Tsumugi is a far better antagonist for a multitude of reasons. I'm not going to dig into Tsumugi too much here, I just want to briefly explain. She has a reason for doing what she does. Okay, it's a stupid reason, but it's a reason. And I know I said antagonists don't need a good motivation, but in most cases there is nothing wrong with having a motivation, okay? As long as it works, it makes sense within context of the story, it is going to enhance the character. She is a die-hard Danganronpa fan who wants the show to keep going, so she crafts the best killing game possible. She wants to keep the ratings up, she wants to keep viewers happy, and I know it's stupid, but from a business perspective, from the perspective of what is basically a greedy corporation, Team Danganronpa, it makes sense how someone would act in this way. Also, Tsumugi is young. She might not even be an adult in game. I don't think they really say whether or not she is or whether or not anyone is. But considering this, we can make other assumptions that she was possibly manipulated or influenced by Team Danganronpa as one of its writers, which explains her bizarre behaviour. Also, we see Tsumugi for the entire game. Her betrayal hits harder, because as the protagonist, we knew her. Or at least we thought we did. You see what I mean? It's a lie. It is a perfect reflection of that theme, But with Junko, I just don't get that same feeling, because she's just a girl. She's just a random girl. We didn't even meet her, ever. We met Mukuro. We didn't meet Junko. Her reveal does not evoke any kind of emotion, because this is our first time actually seeing Junko. Whereas with Tsumugi, she made it to the end, and her betrayal has way more emotional depth on a character level, and brilliantly reflects that central idea, while also being incredibly despairing. Just from that alone, I can deduce that Tsumugi is a far better antagonist than Junko could have ever been, with what was established in her. Anyway, that was just an extra argument I felt like shoving in there. I prefer Tsumugi way. I don't think Tsumugi's amazing by any means. I think she's still a little bit flawed. But Junko's just bad. Junko's just bad, in my opinion. I gotta be honest. I have been Sam. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. And if you disagree with my points, please feel free to explain why in the comments down below. This video is again 100% opinion based. It's perfectly fine if you disagree. I'm just a guy with an opinion on a character. Anyway, thank you so much for watching till the end. I will see you next time. See ya. I just need to know.